US President Donald Trump is trying his best to weaponize the tariffs against India, but the messaging coming in from within the United States, from the White House, is appearing more and more contradictory and convoluted, devoid of logic as time passes by. So much so that politicians from within the Republican and the Democratic Party also are condemning Trump's tariff imposition on India. And while the move continues to draw condemnation from outside the United States as well, because to put it simply, free trade cannot just be on Trump's terms. It has to be on equal footing. Let's first tell you what US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had to say. Listen to this.
President Trump is trying to end this war in Ukraine that never would have started if he had been president. And, our European allies need to step up. I don't see them threatening the tariffs on the Indians. And as a matter of fact, they're the ones buying the refined products that's made from the Russian oil.
Now, let's just focus on the last two lines there. Scott Bessent is clearly admitting that Europe is buying refined Russian oil products. But why is the United States then not imposing tariffs on Europe and naming them as a punishment for buying Russian oil? And if punishment for purchasing Russian oil is actually the problem, then the US bias and intentions are clearly suspicious at this point, a huge question mark, given that it is public knowledge that China is the biggest buyer and Turkey another major buyer of Russian oil. In fact, the US Treasury Secretary is, in a way, seemingly instigating Europe against India. Is it because the United States is scared about Russia, China, and India coming together as a formidable force? Some believe even trying to create a wedge between the three by adopting different yardsticks on the same tariff aspects. Because the statistics alone speak for themselves. New Delhi, Moscow, Beijing represent nearly 37% of the world's population, while BRICS alone represents more than 41% of the world's GDP as of last year. More than 41% of the world's GDP. And with Prime Minister Modi meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping and the Russian President Vladimir Putin during the upcoming SCO summit starting this weekend, the US appears to be clearly worried. In fact, the advisor to Donald Trump has blamed Prime Minister Modi and India for the Russia-Ukraine war, stating that Ukraine is quote-unquote Modi's war. In fact, it's baffling that for his boss, Donald Trump, it has been Biden's war ever since. Prime Minister Modi, remember, has maintained that this is not an era of war. The frustration is so evident with Navarro that he further called Indians arrogant. But here's a reality check on the trade between Russia and the United States. The trade between the two sides has grown by 20% since the Trump administration returned to power. 20%, a fact revealed by Russian President Vladimir Putin during his meeting with Donald Trump at the recent Alaska summit. And if Ukraine is Prime Minister Modi's war, as Navarro claims, then he seems to be clearly unaware of the global dynamics at play. After the Alaska summit and post the tariff imposition, world leaders from around the world, different parts, including Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, have called Prime Minister Modi, highlighting India's role, with Zelensky explicitly stating that Ukraine counts on India's contribution towards helping ending the war. Contribution towards helping to end the war. Similar to Scott Bessent's comments, Trump's top economic advisor warned that unless India does not stop Russian crude trade, the US and its president will not change the stance on the steep tariffs on Indian imports. Listen to this now.
One thing I think we've all learned is that you need to keep your eyes on the horizon and recognize that there are going to be ebbs and flows in things before we reach the final position. And if the Indians don't budge, I don't think President Trump will either.
Now, let's just take note of how the opposition, the Democrats, are reacting to the Trump administration's knee-jerk statements. In a statement, Democrats in the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee slammed Trump and his administration for imposing tariffs on India, stating that the tariffs on Indian imports are quote-unquote hurting Americans and sabotaging the US-India ties. That's not even all. The tariffs against India being an issue within the Republican camp as well. With former US Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, last week stating that the US should treat India as a prized, free, democratic partner. The reactions have been coming in, including US allies, analysts who understand the rising might of India as the largest democracy. With Australia's Trade Minister also becoming the latest one to condemn America's actions.
A country that believes in free and fair trade. We believe that the best way of ensuring prosperity for our workers and our country is to continue with free, fair and open trade. So we don't support the imposition of tariffs, whether they be on Australia or India. Protectionism is not the way to improve the prosperity of your populations. It's free and fair trade that will get you to that point.
And from all of this, one thing seems to be clear, that under pressure on India, the White House is clearly confused and contradictory. While the double standards by America are more than evident, it's the trust that is completely lost, for the United States' interests being primary, it seems, and the only guiding principle, while trust seems to be simply tertiary.